Brilliant. Okay, well, good afternoon. I'm Neil McInroy. I'm a senior fellow for the Global Advancement for Community Wealth Building with the Democracy Collaborative. We're a US-based think tank, and I do that 3 days a week. And 2 days a week, I'm a community wealth building advisor with the Scottish Government. I'm an economist. I've been working about 25 years in the world of economics, if you like, and economic development. Community wealth building was actually devised. The term was made by the Democracy Collaborative in America, focusing in Cleveland, Ohio, which is a Rust Belt city in the northeast of the country, and that's where the term was devised. And since community wealth building has grown quite a lot in the US, the moment I work in Chicago and the Bay Area, California, and also I helped to translate the US work over to the UK initially in Preston, the so-called Preston model. And since now it's been adopted by the Scottish Government, I'm going to explain a little bit about what's happening in Scotland. I want to just start, though, if you may, economists do this, so apologies, just to give a little bit of, the context set and a little bit of the theory behind community wealth building. And I think one of the things I firstly say is that, this community wealth building is a direct response to what are the mega trends and huge crises we face, climate change, democratic crises, economic woes. It's a response to those big change. And it says, how do we transform our economy, make it more resilient and build a better well-being? I mean, the economy is a social construct. Yeah, it's not a natural science. And in that sense, we can construct it any way we want. And I think what community wealth building is saying, let's try and transform and make our economy work better for people, place, and the planet. And it's sort of saying we want change, and it's it's directly, if you like, fighting against, if you like, or attacking what was called trickle-down economics, where the idea is you get growth, and people will get the fruits of that growth. It'll trickle down to them. Well, that doesn't really work. So it's a direct play into, if you like, how do we make an economy that truly works for people? And the interesting point about community wealth building is questions of wealth. Now, wealth is a defining feature of all economies. Who has it or doesn't have it? Where does it go? And how strong is the flow to places and to people? And a way to think about wealth is like a flow hydrology, like water system. So where does it start? Where is it landing? And where is it flowing to? Is it flowing through our streets, our communities, our businesses? Or is it, in a sense, disappearing down the estuaries and out into the oceans and out into the global ether of the global economy? So community wealth building thinks a lot about these flows of wealth and how it flows within places. And the idea is not to let it flow away distant places, but actually to try and lock it in to communities or businesses and to the Scottish economy. And in that, it thinks about, redistribution of wealth. You've all heard of that, no doubt. Redistribution of wealth, which is like you get the growth and then it trickles down via investment. We use public sector investment to support more growth, or you end up with you get regeneration and giving the poorest hand up, redistribution of welfare state sort of idea. So there's redistribution, it's about that. But what community wealth building is much more about is actually about pre-distribution of wealth, what we call torrent down of wealth, where we get more benefits for local businesses and the economy through investment, and we start to see more multipliers, the clustering of businesses and support for activity within an economy. So plugging the leaks and locking in wealth. Now, I mentioned before about these huge crises, and one of the key things that's important to focus on wealth at the moment is that we have a wealth problem. 10 of the richest men own the same amount of wealth as half the population of the world. This is actually an unprecedented concentration of wealth. Even in medieval times, whenever you look back, we never had this concentration of wealth in so few hands. So we have a system in the economy where wealth tends to trickle upwards to some very, very rich individuals and some very, very big corporations. And that is something we need to correct if we're going to see more effective flows of wealth, and also to deal with the climate crisis that we have. In Scotland, well, we're not as bad, of course. We do redistribute our wealth fairly well, and there's some good elements of pre-distribution, but still, the wealthiest 10% own more than 200 times as much as the least wealthy 10%. We still have concentrations of wealth, and the question is, where does that wealth go? Does it nourish our businesses, or is it, in a sense, being extracted outside of Scotland into the hands of the few, if you like? Now, in community wealth building, we try to, it's a complicated term, I suppose, in some senses. It's like, well, how do we start to basket it up, think through, how do we actually, how do we go about it? And one of the metaphors I use here is to think about plumbing. Let's think about wealth flowing like a plumbing system. So where are the U-bends? How do we create effective faucets, sinks, baths? How do we create a plumbing system so that it truly is working for our businesses and our local economy? A pro-Scottish, a pro-business plumbing system is what community wealth building is trying to do. Now, in that, we have 5 different pipes of wealth, if you like. One is financial wealth. So ensuring flows of investment and financial issues work for local people, communities and business. So it's the financial ecosystem here we're talking about. And how do we get the plumbing right that it truly nurtures our economy and our businesses? Then you've got workforce, money in people's pockets. How are we making sure that we have got effective plumbing system to make sure that wealth being created by businesses is truly flows into people's pockets and into communities? Then you've got spending, which is in a sense public spending. About, I would say, we don't know, I don't know exact figures, but typically it's probably around 30 to 35% of all economic activity in Scotland comes from the public purse. Now we need to make sure that we use that money as effectively as possible. It's our money in a sense, and make sure that it does flow effectively through the economy and into businesses to create more wealth and more prosperity. Then you have land and property, a huge source of wealth, often locked up, if you like, in terms of like ownership of land. So how do we maximise the value of that to communities and businesses in terms of land and property? And all that feeds into what the final pipe, if you like, or pillars, is inclusive ownership. How do we make sure that there is a range of small businesses, social enterprises, enterprises and businesses that are close and relate to places in which they reside? The great resilient places of the world have a high proportion of smaller businesses who work, by their very nature, work virtuously for the communities and for the local economy. Now, one key element, I mentioned the spending pillar there, the bottom left there. One of the key elements of community wealth building is what we call anchor institutions. They are particular organisations, public institutions by and large, but also you get key business and community and voluntary sector anchors. These are businesses or public institutions that are not going anywhere. They're not disappeared the Cayman Islands. They're not disappeared in New York or Korea. They're here for the long term, the long haul. And clearly our public institutions, Aberdeen City Council will always be in Aberdeen. Aberdeen Football Club will always be in Aberdeen. So these are important economic anchors. They have what we call in the business sticky capital, financial, economic, intellectual, social and human capital, because they're always going to be there and they always relate and have a deep embedded relationship to a particular place. And in that, they employ lots of people, they buy lots of things, and they own land and property and are an investor. So community wealth building, not solely, but community wealth building has a focus on anchor institutions. How do we make these anchor institutions work more effectively for our local communities, for our local businesses, particularly when we're talking about these public sector anchors? So that's kind of the theory, and I'm going to talk a little bit about these 5 pillars in more detail in a moment. But what's been happening in Scotland? As I say, I've been seconded in Scotland for the last 2 years as a community wealth building advisor part-time. Well, in Scotland, we have been working a lot on policy in terms of how do we embed community wealth building within policy, particularly the National Strategy for Economic Transformation, where community wealth building features heavily. We're engaging across a range of Scottish Government policy areas, and there is planned legislation on community wealth building later in this parliamentary term. You can imagine in terms of engagement, community wealth building, I sit in the Economic Development Directorate, but of course there's a range of different areas that community wealth building touches upon in terms of finance, local government, business policy and so forth. We've actually advanced 5 pilot areas in 5 locations in Scotland, and any of you are in those areas, it's worth sussing out what's going on and how you can play into this agenda. But Clackmannanshire, South of Scotland, Western Isles, Taste Cities, particularly a focus on Fife, and elements in Glasgow City region. Ayrshire has the Scottish Government committed £3 million to advance community wealth building through the Ayrshire Growth Deal. And we think, well, we know about over half of Scottish local authorities are now looking at or currently implementing elements of community wealth building. There's also work on industry and economic sectors looking at community wealth building too, including the communications industry sector. And all this is woven into the kind of COVID recovery strategy where all 32 local areas will develop plans with community wealth building embedded in that. Let me just go into a little bit more detail about these different pillars and what sort of things have been happening. I think one of the key elements in vis-a-vis businesses is this whole public spending, where public spending is seen as a vital economic lever and support for local businesses and multipliers. So there is a recognition, a growing recognition and a growing set of practices and advice, and hopefully legislation perhaps enhance this, of how businesses are fit to compete, bid and win for public sector contracts. And this is all about returning more spend to a local, regional and national economy. There's also work being done on using the pre-commissioning process, that's before the actual tender goes out, as an opportunity to shape local markets and supply chains. So thinking further ahead, what is a particular public body going to be commissioning? What are they going to be buying in a year, 18 months time? And to think, do we have a local market, a local set of businesses who can actually bid for those contracts? Do we have Scottish businesses that can bid for those contracts? So it's about animating and developing the market by thinking ahead in terms of what the public spending demands would be. It's also all about reducing carbon footprint of supply by using more local suppliers. I mean, that, you know, if you've got a local supplier, they're less likely to have wider distribution chains. They're also going to be local, so there's less of a carbon footprint. And one interesting other thing about spending is how do we reduce costs by developing supply chains and thus creating more entrants to the market. In some sectors, there is evidence that suggests there is not enough Scottish supply or local supply to bid for those contracts. So it goes to bigger companies based down south in England or perhaps globally. How do we actually get more local suppliers bidding, and that can actually increase competition and potentially reduce costs because of more competition within that particular market sector. So that's the kind of things that we're working on, and some of the action plans of community wealth building are starting to advance vis-a-vis the spending pillar. On land and property, it's very much about getting a better understanding of those assets held by anchor institutions, particularly the public sector anchor institutions, can be used more effectively and productively for local businesses, economic, environmental and social gain. This is about, you know, our public institutions hold vast amounts of land and property. How can they be brought back more into economic use or more productive use, and what would be the role of the business sector in that? Community wealth building addresses vacant and derelict land by supporting local ownership and expansion. So it looks at vacant and derelict land and how they can be brought back again into more economic productive use, including for local businesses. Community wealth building allows test cases of community ownership of land and property use to give a stronger economic profile, and thinking about reuse of buildings and properties in towns, particularly again those ones that are owned by public sector institutions, but also trying to think through a more effective compulsory purchase, or even what's not there yet in terms of compulsory sales orders to rejuvenate our town by actually thinking about how we can address vacant and derelict property or underuse of property. The third area to think about in community wealth building, these pillars, is workforce, and clearly the Fair Work agenda, the Fair Work Convention, and how there is adoption of fair work charters across Scotland, particularly in Clackmannanshire and Fife, which many businesses are engaged in. There is the living wage place agenda, which many businesses have signed up to in Dundee. So it's very much about ensuring we have decent work, decent terms and conditions, and decent pay for our workforces across public, social and commercial sectors. Use procurement plans to generate more local jobs, supporting business growth. So very much think about procurement, public sector procurement, and how it can generate more jobs and support business growth within localities. Encourage development of intermediate labour market initiatives to address long-term unemployment and worklessness. This is about trying to create stepping stones for out of work people to get back into the labour market. And as I say, encourage the take off fair work and employment charters across an area, including Fife and Clackmannanshire, where there's ones happening at the moment. In terms of finance, this is very much about trying to join up public funds. It's about greater use of community finance. It's about exploring and harnessing of community share offers. It's about how we think about pension funds and how we can diversify local investment of those, how we direct investment of those pension funds to local opportunities and to local business ideas and acumen, if you like. And clearly thinking about finance as new philosophy of sustainable banking with missions to make money work for positive change is very much the ethos of the Scottish National Investment Bank. So trying to think how we create a financial ecosystem which torrents and flows through into businesses to create the next generation, if you like, of economic activity and growth. Oh. And finally, we have the inclusive ownership pillar, which is very much about how do we move our economy much more to support small businesses, employee-owned organisations, and how do we think about the support architecture there to support our small businesses and our local economies. So that's a bit of a run through. I'm going to wind up now and hopefully get some questions or some thoughts. But the next steps for community wealth building in Scotland, we have the programme for government, where it was the legislation was identified, announced, and National Strategy of Economic Transformation has come out to introduce legislation this parliamentary session. The purpose of this legislation will be to address barriers identified by areas leading implementation of community wealth building. So it's barriers for those localities that already, those 5 pilot areas and others, to support further embedding of this approach. We have a community wealth building steering group chaired by Mr. Arthur, who is the Minister for Public Finance, Planning and Community Wealth. And we're now about to enter an intense period of discussion with key stakeholders and those implementing community wealth building to explore potential legislative proposals. The consultation document will hopefully be out sometime in this year, and you'll all get a chance to say and talk about what you think of community wealth building and how it could be improved and what legislation we may require. That's all from me. There's my details, my Scottish Government email and my other work. Just email any questions after this session, no problem at all. I hope that's been interesting so far. And I will now stop sharing my screen if I can. And I'm happy to take any thoughts or any questions you may have. Or if I bamboozled you so much you're thinking, oh, I've not got any. Come on, who's going to help me out? Who's going to kick off? Anything you didn't understand or want more clarification on? Hello.
Is there anyone, Neil, we as small business people, well, I'm saying we're all small business, but not all necessarily I am. Is there any way we can help there, or is it just a case of keeping up to date with what's happening, or is there anything that we personally can do there?
I think there's 2 things. Who was it that spoke there? Was it Marilyn?
It was.
Hi, Marilyn. Thanks for that. I think there's 2 things primarily. Firstly is 3 things. Firstly, keep up to speed with the community wealth building agenda as much as you can. It's a fast-moving agenda and it's quite a core part of Scotland's economic strategy. Secondly, I think it'd be interesting to know what your local authority, whatever it may be, is thinking and doing around community wealth building. And thirdly, keep your eye on the the consultation process when it comes out, hopefully later in this year, and any umbrella organisation you're part of, like FSB Scotland or whatever, see stick your oar in terms of what you think about the consultation document, anything that you think you'd like to see advancing as regards this agenda. Is anything particularly interested you, Marilyn?
Nothing in particular, just I'm someone who's always been very keen on my area and helping out and doing what I can to help people. I do a lot of volunteering, and it's just something it was just struck my head as an individual small business owner, what I could be doing. My local area is Inverclyde, and I haven't got the foggiest what they're doing, but I will be checking it. And yeah, thank you, Neil.
I mean, I would say, Marilyn, you prompt me there, is that I think there is something important about the type of business you're talking about in your operations, is that it's that relational aspect. You know, it should allow you the opportunity to maximise your input into the wider society and health of Inverclyde, and support you in that endeavour. And I think that's what it's about. It's about deepening that business social relationships, if you like, which is so important to creating great places. And I think it's to try and accentuate that and trying to build that goodness, I suppose, that's in all of us, and particularly in many businesses, to play that more embedded local role within the community. And it's there, community uphold's there to kind of tap into that sentiment, if you like, that hankering. Is there anyone else? Oh,
thank you.
Kate, can you give some practical examples on this, if that's working so far? Well, across the pilot areas, there's a number of great lessons coming forward, particularly around engaging business more effectively within public sector supply chains, in terms of employee conversions of some businesses, employee ownership conversions. I think it allows businesses to come into the fold, if you like, of the conversations about economic strategy, opposed to being recipients of it. I think it makes them more active players around those 5 pillars that I mentioned, particularly the spending one. So I think there's many examples in the pilot areas where there's actually been a deepening of engagement from businesses within the economic strategy processes. I think it's also helped in rethinking business support architecture, and maybe we can go further on that even, in terms of how we Business Gateway and how those support services operate in Scotland, and how they can really support businesses to grow and be successful, but also play a wider role within the wider social and environmental health of a locality also. So I hope that's helpful. I could probably give you more concrete examples after this in terms of written down examples, but I hope that's helpful at the moment, Kate. Kate, anything you want to add? You can be shy though. It's okay if you want to be shy, but if you want to come in back to me on anything, that's fine. Okay. Stan, you've put a comment in there. I think it was a comment about yourself looking to build a cooperative digital platform. Could you explain a little bit about that work, Stan? No. Okay. Anyone else? Anyone else for anything else? No. I think I saw Barry McCullough's face there at a point in time. Was that Barry from FSB?
Now British Business Bank.
I'm sorry, Barry. No, yes, you've moved on.
That's okay. That's okay. I thought I'd have a nosy. Just finished a session and wanted to see how you were and what you were chatting about.
Yeah, good. Well, was there anything different from what you'd heard before?
No, just even more polished, even more brilliant.
Too kind, Barry. Really good to see you.
Yeah, you too.
Well, if there's nobody for anything else. Oh, Stan's come in there. Ah, right, got you, Stan. I think what you're talking about there, Stan, is right in the zone of community wealth building. I'd like to know more about that. But that digital platform, the type of platforms that can help businesses to both commune together, but also do progressive social things, ethical things, I think is really, really important. There's many examples in the United States of those sorts of things as well, these cooperative platforms. And it's kind of like a new digital ecosystem for businesses, where there is a shared platform by which they can come together better. And I think what you talk about there seems a very right in the community wealth building zone. So fair wind in your sails with that one, Stan. Great. And certainly email me any further information you require or any conversation you want to have in the future.
I don't know if this comes into it, Neil. Sorry, it's Marlon again, being a pain. I kind of got landed with redoing the patient's garden at our local hospice, which had been touched because of COVID for 2 years. And there was no budget, and I put out my hand and sent letters to lots of local businesses. And one business came back to me. I don't know if this is something we could all be using as well. They use their house building company and renting company. They use a lot of subcontractors, and all their subcontractors, within their contract, they have to do so much community stuff each year. And they got lots of professionals to come along and help do all sorts of things, which in their case came to something that would have cost us £2,500 at least to get done. But because they wrote that into their contracts, this company came and did all that work for us with professionals. It was absolutely amazing. It's made a difference to what remains of the lives of the patients of the hospice. Maybe that's something more companies should be considering. Does that make sense? Is that part of it?
Yeah, absolutely part of it. I mean, there is now community benefits clauses that are placed into public sector contracts, which means that businesses who are awarded those contracts have to do a percentage of their activity, have to offer community benefits as part of the contract that they're delivering, be whatever it may be. So that's very much a part of it, and that might be what you're referring to there, Marilyn. But we need more of that, of course. And it's not just about forcing businesses; it's about encouraging and recognizing the good sort of behaviour that good businesses engage in, and recognizing the importance of that. Because I think it shouldn't be an afterthought. Well, businesses that do it need to be sort of recognized and say that is a good thing and rewarded accordingly and noted. And so I think that is a key part of what we're talking about here. It's that business responsibility at a very micro level, which I think is so important. And it stands in contrast, of course, to some larger corporates who are a bit more detached or even extractive from the place in the community and don't play its full role. So what you're doing is very laudable and important, Marlon, and I think that's very much in tune with community wealth building. And anything that would make it easier for you and your fellow businesses to do that sort of thing, then please let us know in the consultation. But keep on that great work, Marlon. It sounds fantastic. Is there anyone for anything else? I'm conscious of time, but I'm not. I'm conscious we've got 12 minutes or so left, but we don't need to use it all. You know where I am. Well, unless there's anything else, I think I will finish. Is that okay? Anybody want to say anything else before? No? No. Okay. Great. Thanks for listening in. Thanks, and you got my details, so contact me anytime, and enjoy the rest of your week.